Well, thank you so much, Principal Barnett, and thank you to Relay Elementary for hosting the second of the Southwest Area Education Advisory Council's candidate forums. We had an earlier one before the primary, and very excited to welcome back the two candidates that have advanced to the primary. So first of all, congratulations to Lisa and Matt for making it past that round. And thank you very much to all of you for being here. This is a very important part of the process to hear from the candidates, to learn about the issues, and to get sort of an informed discussion and debate. So for those of you that don't know, I'm just going to say a few words about what the Southwest Area Education Advisory Council is, and give you a little bit more context for what the council does and how it works in this area. So the Area Advisory Councils are a long-standing policy of the School Board of Baltimore County. They have existed for 4 or 5 decades. And the role of the councils is to serve as liaisons between community stakeholders, teachers, students, faculty, people related to schools, and feed information back to the school board, as well as to go the other direction and be a resource for taking information from the school board and the school district and communicating that out to school district stakeholder members, such as yourselves. So we hold monthly meetings. Last year we were at Johnny Cake Elementary. This year we will be rotating. We had our first meeting yesterday at Johnny Cake, but we'll be headed over to Southwest Academy and then Catonsville Middle School for some of our later meetings during this academic year. And we have a wonderful set of topics upcoming this year: discussions on English language learners, discussions on overcrowding, discussions on many other topics that we think are very salient for those of us in the Southwest area. But tonight we're here to hear from the two candidates that are running for school board in District 1, which represents almost all of the schools in the Southwest area, with the exception of a sliver of 4 or 5 schools right at the north of our area. And what we're going to do tonight is basically give the candidates an opportunity to make some opening remarks. I have a set of prepared questions, 5 or 6 questions that I will ask both the candidates to respond to. And then we'll try to save the bulk of the time really to open the floor to you all to ask questions that may be on your mind. We will also be recording this, so though we have a little bit of a small crowd tonight, we will be able to share this hopefully with a wider audience via our Facebook group and other social media outlets. So without further ado, we're going to begin with 3-minute opening statements from each of the candidates. Then we'll go to the set of pre-prepared questions. I've asked each of the candidates to limit their responses to each of those questions to 1.5 minutes. My colleague, the council member, Andy, will be giving some 30-second stop warnings, and I'll keep us on time. So I think assume that will be the gentleman here, and then defer to Lisa to take the opening statement, if that's okay.
Hello, my name is Lisa Mack, and as you know, I'm running for the Board of Education in District 1. I'd like to thank the council for hosting this forum and for inviting me. I've had many experiences in my life that have prepared me for being a solid candidate for a seat on the board. I have 3 daughters who were well educated by Baltimore County Public Schools and who are now highly educated and successful women. I served on the PTA at their schools, volunteered when I could, and made sure that education was a priority in our home. When my youngest daughter was 6 months old, I returned to school at night and on the weekends over the next 17 years to earn an associate's, bachelor's, and finally a dual master's in management and finance from the College of Notre Dame of Maryland, which I received in 2006. I was fortunate to have many opportunities in my many positions in my 28+ years at Verizon. My most relevant experience is that I led a team of people who developed and deployed both software and hardware to Verizon's large sales and service centers from the southern portion of Virginia to New England. I managed large teams of people, large budgets, and large projects. I retired from Verizon in 2007. In 2009, I began to teach at CCBC as an adjunct faculty member in the School of Language Arts. My time at CCBC made me realize that although my girls received a solid education in Baltimore County Public Schools, the same cannot be said for all students. As a volunteer at Johns Hopkins Hospital and as a former court-appointed special advocate for kids in the foster care system, I see firsthand the traumatic events that shape the lives of many of BCPS's students and get in the way of their learning. My hope as a new board member is that we get back to the basics of truly educating our students and preparing them for real life, and that we stop focusing on promotion rates and graduation rates, because for many students there seems to be little correlation between graduation, actual learning, and success. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mack Gresick. I'm a teacher, I'm a father, and I'm running for Baltimore County Board of Education for District 1. My experience is, this is my 17th year of public education in the state of Maryland. I started out with my student internship in an inner city school, as well as overseas at a parochial school in England. I then went to the Eastern Shore, where I taught in Wycomico County, both middle school and high school. Since then, I am currently teaching in Howard County Public School Systems, where I'm teaching social studies, all grade levels. I've also been a professional development school liaison, helping new teachers prepare for the future through Towson University. I've also received a Mentor of the Year award from Salisbury University when I worked on the Eastern Shore. I have my bachelor's in secondary education in social studies. I have my master's in curriculum instruction. I have my admin certification. My entire life has been devoted to public education. And there's three main focuses for me during this campaign. And that is first equity, then transparency, and finally teacher empowerment. In terms of equity, I believe that there is a major issue with overcrowding that I got to witness on a daily basis, talking to people in this community, coming to the meeting last night for the Southwest Education Advisory Council. And people are continually voicing that issue. It needs to be addressed. Next would be transparency and building legitimacy from the Board of Ed. And I plan to do that through a program called Gresick. And for those of you who have come to numerous of these forums, you've heard of that program that I plan on doing and owning myself. And the final one is teacher empowerment. And this hits closest to heart because teachers know what it's like to be in buildings. Okay? Public school teachers in particular, I was just thinking about this today when I was picking up my two little kids from Westchester Elementary, that, you know, as a dad, I have a certain viewpoint of what's going on in Westchester. But as a teacher that would be in Westchester, they really understand it. And they get it. And as a teacher, I plan to listen to that voice as much as possible. My endorsements, I'm endorsed by the entire Team 12, the entire Team 44B that make up all of District 1. I'm also proud to be endorsed by the Teachers Association Baltimore County, as well as ESPBC. Please, please, we have a great option tonight between me and my opponent, and I want you to take that seriously. Listen to what we're saying and consider all options so that we can get the best for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to turn to a set of moderated questions that we have prepared and both of the candidates have copies of here. For each of these, I'll ask the candidates to limit your response to 1.5 minutes, and as we did in the previous candidate forum, we will take a kind of alternating approach to who answers the question first. So given that Mrs. Mack answered the opening statement first, we'll have Mr. Gresick lead this question, and we'll alternate as we go forward with the questions. So the first question is, if elected to the school board, what would be your first priorities and actions aimed at raising student achievement in the school district? Begin with Mr. Gresick.
I answered this in another forum recently, and my response was school climate. I believe kids need to feel safe in order to learn. They need to also make sure that they don't have to worry about that Maslow hierarchy of needs so that they can learn. And so, like, addressing that at first will be a major issue. And I think that goes in par with also building legitimacy. We're building legitimacy right now by making a choice for who is going to sit on the board. And thereby, it's a trust between me and you as to, I'm going to do the best for our kids. My kids go to the school system, your kids go to the school system, and that's going to work together to make sure the climate is the best that we can make it in terms of making sure our kids are well fed, making sure they're safe, making sure they feel safe, and making sure they're ready to learn on a daily basis. Thank you.
I actually have 3 priorities that I would address, as Matt said. I'm sorry. I have 3 priorities.
I don't think it's on.
Thank you. I have 3 priorities that I would address if elected to the board. The first would be, as Matt said, to make sure that kids are safe. I think kids need to feel safe in order to learn. And with my experience as a CASA and also a volunteer at Johns Hopkins, I think sometimes we take for granted the fact that all kids live in good houses where they're getting regular meals and that people are helping them with their homework, and that's not the case. So I think we need to create a climate that helps kids learn. The second thing that I would look at is creating a process whereby we always use teachers' input. There were so many decisions made last year by BCPS with very little teacher input, and teachers know students better than anybody, so why would we not include teachers? And finally, I think BCPS would do well to change its measures of success from promotion or graduation rate to actual grade level mastery. We have very high graduation rates in Baltimore County, but when you look at the numbers, we have high schools where fewer than 5% of students read or perform math on grade level. And for our kids to be successful in life, we cannot continue to allow that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you both. So a number of you, both of you have sort of alluded to or explicitly talked a little bit about equity in some of your responses here. And it's been striking to me as chair of the Southwest Council over the last year. I've had the opportunity to go in a number of the schools in the Southwest area and to see sort of the diversity and heterogeneity within this area, whether it's with regards to the facilities themselves or kind of the climate of the schools we walk in. So I'd like you to think a little bit about, given this kind of diverse setting of Baltimore County, how would you as a board member approach issues of equity to ensure that the school district is meeting all students' needs? We'll begin with Ms. Mack and Mr. Gresick.
I think the number one thing that we need to do to promote equity is to ensure that all students have access to an equitable education. And again, to go back to scores, when you look at schools where there are highly diverse populations, those schools typically have the lowest scores, and that is not fair to the students. I know it presents challenges for the school, but children are entitled to be well educated, and it should not matter in which zip code they live as to what type of education they get. I also think that Baltimore County needs to invest more money in the community school model. Again, with my experience as a CASA and working at Johns Hopkins, when kids come to school, there are many kids that we need to address their needs holistically. Maybe the school system shouldn't have to do that, but I think we've gotten to the point in society where this is probably the most steady, safe place that a kid has. And if a community school model provides additional teachers, smaller class sizes, counselors, anything that a kid needs to be successful, I think that's the model that we need to adopt to ensure that we have all kids performing equitably.
Like my opponent, I also agree in the community school model as an avenue to bridge those gaps of equity. I think the approach that would be best would be to really embrace a group that's already around and actually put together this forum, and that's the Southwest Educational Advisory Council. Those meetings are invaluable. When you go there, you actually hear from principals, from teachers, from parents, all across District 1, and the stories they tell you really enlighten you as to the issues that are going on. For instance, last night, I just recently heard that Johnny Cake was 125% over capacity, which I already knew that, but then to put a face with it, and the fact that there's 8 portables, I teach in a portable. However, 8 portables at elementary school is almost like having a whole other elementary school attached to that school that is a temporary housing. So we need to do better by that. That information comes through that group, and in order to make sure equity occurs, we need to make sure that we educate ourselves on how best to meet our kids where they're at. Thank you.
Thank you. So you've alluded here a little bit to the issues of overcrowding. And as many of you will know, the school district is currently in the process of assessing overcrowding, particularly at the high school level, based on projections of enrollment in the coming years. Several of the options that the district and the contractor who's kind of working on gathering community feedback on this have expressed are rezoning schools, expanding the physical facilities of schools, as well as the increased use of magnet schools. So could each of you discuss how you would approach overcrowding at the high schools and perhaps also at the elementary level? and discuss specifically of these options that have been put on the table: rezoning, expanding facilities, increasing the use of magnets. Which of these you see as most viable as a school board member?
My answer would be all three. Rezoning, expanding facilities, and increase the use of magnet schools are all options that could be on the table. Rezoning, I've received numerous emails that is usually a disruption to those communities, and we want to make that as painless as possible. Several people have conveyed the feeling of, we bought this house with the expectation of going to this school, and I understand that. So one of the things that I would suggest is opening up the magnet program, expanding schools, and also trying to sell our schools as best they can. That we have these great administrations with faculty, and we tend to look at one school versus another and say, well, that school's bad, and this school is good. That kind of way of thinking is counterproductive. Because it doesn't get to the merit of what those teachers, what the staff, and what those parents are going through to make sure their kids are being successful. And so that's where I would come into that approach, is we need to sell it to our community, and the way we sell it to our community is we're honest with our community, and they're going to be honest with us, and hopefully we can build an understanding to best meet all of our kids' needs. Thank you.
I attended all of the rezoning work. I guess it goes off automatically, sorry. I attended the redistricting meetings around the county, and I think most people here know that there are three options on the table. The option that I would support right now is option B, which includes a new school for Lansdowne, a new school for Western, and it splits the overflow of kids between Western and Lansdowne. I do have a concern about Western changing from a zoned magnet to a community magnet. I think I said in my opening remarks that my kids went to Western, and it is a great school, and I'm very excited about more children having the option to experience what Western has to offer. I do believe Lansdowne needs a new school. I think any renovations to Lansdowne will be throwing good money after bad, so I'd be concerned there. But I am concerned when the initial round of discussions took place that so many people were horrified that their kids may have to go to Woodlawn. And again, it gets back to that question of equity in education. We need to have schools where any student would we need to have schools where any student would want to go to any school. It is not fair for some schools to be left out to dry, and that's actually what has happened with Woodlawn in this last round. So I am in favor of option B, but I think we need to do a better job making our schools more equitable so any student would want to go to any school.
Thank you both. So I'll use my teacher voice instead of this for a moment. This next question kind of relates to the last question, which is, in this discussion of overcrowding, a lot of what I've seen come up in the community discussions has to do with the quality of facilities. So beyond just thinking about do we have seats for enough people, people are, I think, concerned about the quality of the seats and the quality of the building that are surrounding students sitting in those seats. So given this kind of prominence of the condition of school facilities, talk about how you would address physical infrastructure. I think Lisa, you've already started to get to this, but specifically issues around Lansdowne High School, and I think also, perhaps Johnny Cake Elementary, where the council has met, has been sort of an ongoing debate about the possible need for a new school.
I think we need to take this from a two-pronged approach. We had a process at Verizon called proactive preventative maintenance. And we would go out and do proactive maintenance so that facilities would not fall into disrepair. And I realize that that takes money, but there's a lot of money being talked about to replace these schools. And I think we need to do a better job keeping schools from falling into disrepair. Like a school like Lansdowne, though, I think, again, is past the point of where renovation would be practical or cost-effective. I think it's at the point where it needs to be renovated. I don't think we can keep the subject on just high schools. My kids went to Arbutus Elementary School. My father-in-law, who would be 102, went to that same school. It's a very old school, but I think it's been well maintained. So I think it can continue to be a school for a while, but I think we have to have a plan that looks at all schools over a period of time. Schools have to be safe, they have to be clean, they have to have running water, flushing toilets. But within that framework, we then have to see how we would allocate money to either replace schools or renovate them when we can.
I support option B as well. Just want to clarify that. Anne Arundel County already has a great model for this. They have a 10-year plan where everybody buys in. And what's great about it is it takes the politics out of facility management. So you have a community like Lansdowne, and you have a community like Delaney that seem to be on opposite polar ends of the spectrum as far as political power is concerned. It was unfortunate. So my proposal would be to have that 10-year plan that would cycle out and would be based not only on proposed populations in the school, but it would be on also age of facilities and things like that. And then we would adapt it to Baltimore County. We would have to have buy-in of both the county executive and the county council in order to work. And that's something that I'm willing to sell. The next part is about Lansdowne, and I absolutely, unequivocally are committed to a new Lansdowne High School. About a year ago, I was at Lansdowne meetings where they were supposed to have a renovation, and I decided to go to the bathroom, and I decided to try the water. Grit is a great adjective to describe the people of Lansdowne. It should never describe the water that their kids drink. We need to do better. Thank you.
This past year saw a number of high-profile tragedies, whether it's the Parkland, Florida shooting, Santa Fe, Texas, even a number of sort of smaller-scale incidents here in the state of Maryland. As a school board member, how would you work to ensure a safe school environment while also balancing the educational priorities of a school learning context?
I think one of the great things that we're doing in Baltimore County right now in restorative practices. Restorative practices is a great way to understand those kids that are falling through the cracks. Because we're looking at kids as individuals, not as data points to be measured. And they're starting to make connections. Also having more school counselors, more PPW workers, more psychologists. Okay? SROs are also a great resource. They're only in elementary schools once a week, however they're in every day at middle and high schools. And if they're properly trained, they can be a great mentor and a great coach to those kids. And what we want to build is we want to build a community web so that those kids that feel threatened, they feel bullied, they feel like they have no other option than to lash out, we can identify them and get those kids the help they need. And so that incidents like that won't happen at our schools. Otherwise, if we do these other measures of like metal detectors and more armed people and stuff like that, there are probably still going to be incidents occurring. And it's a bit like security theater at airports. We need to make sure we do the best for our kids. We need to be proactive and make sure that our kids do not feel unsafe so that they can learn. Thank you.
I actually think that BCPS needs to invest money so that every school has a series of 2 doors. Some schools have that today, but not all schools. And I notice as I go into schools, I hit a button and the next thing I know the door opens. I don't know if somebody's looking at me. I don't know if they're scanning me. I don't know if they think they recognize me. But I think we're at the point in society where we have to prevent a shooter from getting into our schools. And a shooter could be perhaps an estranged parent, where parents are going through a divorce. So I think we need to stop them, have a way to detect if they have a weapon before we allow anybody to come into a school. It pains me when I volunteer in schools to see kids do drills, safe drills, like where are they going to go, where are they going to hide. I think our first priority is to keep people who are going to harm our kids out of the schools, and then to prepare our kids the best that we can, as sad as it is, for what could happen if somebody with a gun gets into a school.
So one component of school safety and school climate is the approach to discipline that's used. And as many of you know, Baltimore County has been in the process of trying out some different practices like restorative justice in recent years. But these practices, both probably as implemented in Baltimore County and more nationally, are subject to some debate as to sort of their efficacy and perhaps trade-offs. So as a school board member, how would you approach school climate and specifically school discipline within the county?
I think that Baltimore County has to have a statement at the beginning of the year that talks about what its expectation is for its students and the parents. And I think that expectation needs to be made very clear to students. I have talked to many people this year, and all I ever hear is that teachers have no powers, classrooms are out of control, kids push the system to its limits because very little is done to them. And I don't think that's fair to the child who's acting out because he's acting out for a reason, but I also don't think it's fair for the rest of the kids in the classroom who, while the teacher is trying to contain a child who is disruptive at the very least, violent at its worst, the rest of the kids aren't learning. So Matt talked about restorative practices. I like the fact that restorative practice focuses on the event or the person's feelings and not what actually happened. But I don't think Baltimore County right now, in all of the schools I've been to, is adequately staffed to really implement restorative practices the way that it should be implemented. And I would just say that I support a system that supports teachers in their attempts to manage their classrooms, because I don't think they have that support today. Thank you.
Restorative practices do not replace consequences. And they should not replace consequences if they're implemented properly. I agree that staffing is an issue and it needs to be addressed. One of the discipline issues that I face as a teacher is multitude of paperwork to go on top of consequences actually occurring for a child. And for me as a teacher, I like to say, wash my own dirty laundry. And so it encourages me to make sure that I call home, that I get that parent involved as soon as possible when there's an issue, so that kids can learn in that environment. As far as school climate is concerned, restorative practices, and I'm going this entirely off of memory, I believe was started as restorative justice in New Zealand. And it has proven results in New Zealand. And if we buy into it, I believe it will improve results here. It does not replace the discipline policy. And let me say that again. It does not replace the discipline policy. When there are actions that deem consequences, there needs to be those consequences. However, it can be a great model to building that positive culture in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. So this will be the last of my moderated questions, and then we'll turn it over to audience members for questions from the audience. So audience members, take a moment and start thinking about what you would like to ask the candidates. But the last question that I will leave the candidates with is this. A strong school board is arguably one that works together on issues, can find reasonable compromises, and avoids political infighting. If elected to the board, how would you work with other school board members, particularly those who may have differing views on a number of policy issues, to ensure a high-functioning and effective school board that best serves students? Mr. Gresick.
For me, it always comes down to one thing, and that's putting students first. I've seen numerous times. I have my co-teacher in the back, Mr. Fish, and we disagree. You know, it doesn't happen that often, but we do disagree. And we all always boil it down to one question of, well, what's best for this kid? We can move past our differences, and we see the light. We see, our path forward. And that's the way the board needs to function. What is best for our children in Baltimore County schools, period? How does this policy benefit our kids? Are there drawbacks? Are there going to be unseen consequences for this policy? And in discussing that, we need to make sure we look past the differences of each other. Getting 12 people to agree on anything is difficult. And that needs to also be realized. But these are our kids, and we should want the best for our kids at all times. And that shouldn't be up for debate.
Fortunately or unfortunately, in my many years at Verizon, I have had a lot of experience working with people in different groups, people in different states, even people in different countries. And because we had common goals, we got through it. It wasn't always easy. And I do agree with Matt that if every time the board faces a question, it asks itself, is this decision in the best interest of kids? I think we'll get to the right conclusion. As I said earlier, I think teachers need to be more involved in the input process so that we can use teachers' input into coming up with the right answer. But I do think that we need to remove a lot of the politics that are in education today. I was shocked at how political education is, and it's not in the best interest of the kids. So if we always ask ourselves, will this serve the kids well? Will it serve the teachers well? And do teachers generally support what we're talking about? They know best. I think we would be a lot better off than the board is today. Thank you.
Thank you both. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. We have a microphone set up at the front here. We'll continue a similar format, giving both candidates an opportunity to respond for a minute and a half. And unless the question is specifically targeted or addressed to a specific candidate, we'll continue the alternating pattern. So looks like we have a first question. You may need to, let's see, hit a little, should be a little switch on the top of it. Turn it on.
There it is. I'll bend over. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. 4 years ago, our school board rep was appointed politically. I asked the person next to me, do you know who he is? She has no idea. We haven't seen nor heard from him in 4 years. So my first question is, what will you do to make yourselves visible, and what will you do to listen to your constituents? My second question is, how will you work with elected officials at the local level, the county level, and the state level to ensure that Baltimore County Public Schools get the best and everything they deserve? And the third question, do you know who our board member is?
Yes, I do. Yes,
Okay.
Were you asking, do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know who he is, but I wonder how many people in here do.
Since January 29th, I have walked 1,700 miles talking to people about education. I have listened to people, I have had people on my porch, I have had people in my house, I have gone to Atwater's more times since January 29th, my first meeting being with Matt, than I ever had before. I sat in somebody's living room 2 weeks ago until 10:30 at night talking about gifted and talented. I make myself available. I had 2 people stop by my house today, one to talk about an incident that happened at Catonsville Elementary School, and one to talk about an incident that involved her granddaughter. I am very available, and I would continue to be available. I would like very much to be able to visit every school at least once a year, have meetings with teachers, get input from administrators, and use that input to take back to the board. And I know there was another part of your question that
How will you work with elected officials?
Again, I have had some tough jobs in my life, and as long as the team that I'm on, whether it's somebody I don't agree with politically, as long as we're working towards the same goal, and that is to improve education for children, I don't think I'm going to have any problem working with politicians. Thank you.
Just clarify it's next to it. Just one of the things that I definitely plan on doing is embracing this group, Southwest Area Education Advisory Council. Like I said before, have parents and teachers from a multitude of schools come together, actually advise you. I think that's pretty much in their name, a council of advisors. So that would be my first step. One of the things I also plan on doing is I want to visit every single school. Every school needs to be visited, and I've been in education long enough to know that I don't want the dog and pony show that usually occurs when board members show up. And you all of a sudden get that last second email, oh, there's a VIP showing up, do you want them in your classroom? And then certain teachers will volunteer and then they'll come and, you know, everything's amazing. I want to be that board member that comes and actually sees what's going on and can witness it and talk to teachers, talk to administrators, and be that bridge to solving their problems. Finally, working with county and state officials, I had the immense honor of helping elect one of the best people I know, and that's Eric Edersol. He's a delegate for District 12, and he's the one who talked me into running in the first place. I plan on working with state officials, county officials as well, our county councilman and our county executive to make sure that all the kids are served the best. Sorry.
It was 2 questions. That's true.
Other questions, please?
Good evening. Full disclosure, I'm not a Baltimore County resident. However, I do work with people with disabilities who reside in Baltimore County, including students of people with disabilities. Can you talk about how you would assure that they receive the same equitable education that you talk about for other students?
Well, in listening to those community members, I've had a great suggestion about having a pool of parents as a resource to talk to parents that are going through that special education process, because it can be very daunting. And I've lost count hundreds, of IEP meetings for maybe even thousands for several different individuals. And it's definitely, there's that guilt associated, there's defensiveness, and to have a resource of parents there to say, it's okay, you're going to get through this, and there's a system in here to make sure that your child is going to be okay, would be great, would be immensely reassuring, and build equity toward it. So that's one area. One of the other things I'm passionate about is when I was even in college, I worked with special needs individuals, and I was in IEP meetings, before I even graduated. And to have that mentor relationship for me was invaluable. And I think that's something that could also be encouraged as well, especially for those kids that are like the life skills areas. And we have that Best Buddy program at my school as well. So thank you for the question.
I have been very surprised as I have gone to various meetings around the county at how hard parents have to advocate for their kids. Every meeting I've been to for any special education group, dyslexia group, they actually have pamphlets telling the parents what you should do. And write this letter in this many days, follow up in writing in this many days. And it concerns me greatly that parents have to work so hard to advocate for their kids when all kids are entitled to an education. I think it's nice that those groups provide that type of advocacy, but I think the school system needs to recognize that it owes children an education, and it needs to provide the resources to provide that education. And one way that I think Baltimore County could do that is to have more special education teachers with the most current special education training. I learned today that there are 5 self-contained classrooms at Catonsville Elementary School. They're called COWS, and they're for nonverbal students. I didn't know that. I did learn that they were adequately staffed, so I was glad to hear that. But I do not think parents should have to advocate as hard as a lot of the parents I have spoken to have had to advocate to get their children's services. If a child has a need, the school should be in the position to recognize it and address it.
Hello. I would be very interested in hearing how you guys would like to structure handling not only children with traditional special needs, but twice exceptional students or even incredibly gifted students. They have needs also.
I think Gifted and talented is an area that Baltimore County has to do some work on. I'm sure you're aware that we have blended classes now, and within a classroom we can have students who are on grade level, students who are maybe 2 grades above grade level, and students who are maybe 2 grades below grade level. I don't personally think that one teacher, no matter how trained or how excellent he or she is, can address the needs of all of those students. I would like to see more focus on the gifted and talented program. I recently learned that as groups of students, that group of students has had the least growth of any group of students in Baltimore County. And my perception and my observation, because I volunteer in schools, is in many cases those kids are kind of teaching themselves, because the teacher's time is spent with the kids who are in the middle and the kids who are below grade level, trying to give them as much help as they can, that he or she can give the students. I think that we need to teach teachers how to recognize gifted and talented, and the kid who's always raising his or her hand shouldn't be a pest. It might just be a kid who has a need to share the knowledge that he or she has, and how the teacher should be able to handle that. So I think we do have some work to do in that area.
For me, I think it comes down to a buffet of opportunities. Like, we present those kids, and like kids, for instance, who are gifted and talented, there's a multitude of intelligence that they can be gifted in. For instance, my next door neighbor is also the chairwoman of my campaign. Her son's definitely gifted, and he likes to he actually takes apart like these phones and like these electronics, and figures out how to work. And so he joined the robotics club, and that's a great outlet for his gift in technology. And I think increasing those options, that buffet of opportunities, would be a great way of challenging those kids. Also giving teachers time, and I agree with my opponent, giving teachers time to identify those kids that are gifted, that need to be challenged. Again, my co-teacher and I often discuss, say, you know what, this young man or this young woman, they need to be challenged more. Why don't we suggest them for honors? Why don't we suggest them for GT and our own school system? And that needs to be emphasized in Baltimore County as well. The other piece that I would also put into this is the gifted and talented program in itself is almost having a renaissance in Baltimore County right now. And that's a good thing that I hopefully will reassure you after this meeting. Both my opponent and I were at the meeting where they were talking about this program being initiated once again and it coming around so it meets the needs of those kids that don't feel like their needs are met.
How would you increase educational opportunities during the school day for twice exceptional students, which, for those who might not be familiar with the term, are students who are both disabled and gifted at the same time, usually in different areas?
All right, so like, can you give me an example, is what I'm asking for?
Perhaps an autistic child who is an extraordinary reader.
Okay.
Or mathematician.
All right, so again, those need to be identified early. Those kids need to be identified early, and so that they can be assessed, and they can be saying, okay, this is the area in which this kid is a star at. But in other areas, he still might need to, he needs to make sure that he can, perform at that level, but also we need to challenge them where they're at. So does that answer your question? Okay.
Again, I think it goes back to awareness and teacher training. I know in the classroom in which I volunteer, a student with autism came in the middle of the year, and what was not realized right away was that the child was exceptionally alarmed or bothered by like the buzz that you hear in classrooms today. And I mean, to the extent that, the child had a visceral reaction to it. So I think training and awareness, and also awareness of the fact that just because a child may be autistic or may have cerebral palsy does not mean that that child is not gifted in reading or math or any other thing that the child might have a gift in. And I think the school system has to identify and address both of those areas.
Thank you.
We'll have time for a few more questions from the audience.
One of the things that was mentioned was overcrowding, and I know from experience in talking to several parents that they're able to seek waivers, particularly from Lansdowne High School going to Catonsville. And I know of one situation where someone applied for 4 different programs and finally got in the door to go to Catonsville. So how do you feel about waivers of, going to a different school, and how would you address that with the overcrowding situation?
I actually had experience with that with my CASA kid, the kid that I represented in the foster care system. Due to the unique nature of her upbringing and some challenges that she had, I felt that her needs would be better served at Catonsville High School. And I filed the paperwork, and I provided supporting documentation, her social worker did, and we were able to get her into Catonsville. And that did not work out to her advantage like I thought it would, but I am familiar with the process. Again, I think it goes back to the fact that we did a better job of having equitable schools. We wouldn't have so many people scrambling to get into Western or scrambling to get into Catonsville. But since we haven't addressed that issue yet, I think that what we could do is maybe accept the waivers, but do a better job of screening kids who don't belong there in the first place. I've been told by many parents that kids come from the city to Catonsville, kids come from the city to Woodlawn. I think if we had more PPWs to address the issue of residency, we would have more room in schools to allow for transfers that may be in the best interest of kids. But I don't think that it should be because you know somebody or that type of thing. I think it should be on merit or a specific need.
Well, your question comes down to gaming system, which I'm gonna, if elected, I'll be on the board of ed. I don't know if I can solve all of life's issues in regards to that gaming system. I'll be honest. I was at a Title I school, and we were able to turn that school around. And I think that's what you need to ultimately do, is turn schools around. But it takes a concerted effort. There's not a button that, the current Board of Ed is not pushing to make all schools great right now. Because it takes time, it takes effort, it takes concerted knowledge by faculty and staff and community to make sure that we change the image of a school so that we resell it, we rebrand it, so that kids and parents want to be a part of that school. So that means that happen. I was at a door recently where they were talking about how they, the neighbor got, their son into Catonsville because of the Chinese program. So I realize it happens, I know it happens, but I think we need to be proactive in it and help those schools at first, like, Lansdowne, Woodlawn, those upper level high schools, so that they can attract kids. And they can say, okay, this is a great school to go to, come here.
I also have another question. Going back to the safety of children and in our school climates, one of the things that's pointed out by many people is that we need more support staff. For example, in this school, we have one guidance counselor, and she is an amazing guidance counselor. But for a school of almost 700 children, to have one counselor, to me, that's just insane. And how would you go about helping to fund those much needed positions of counselors, psychologists, social workers, and make sure that each school has them?
Well, that comes back to that question of working with, government officials. They exist right now, and hopefully advocating for those funds so that we can have not only school counselors, but social workers and psychologists. One of the things I heard last night was how principals aren't able to pick their own psychologists, which could make for an awkward school situation, kind of like a Toby and Michael incident, where they don't quite both get along. So that's those are issues there. But that's what I would do, is I would advocate, so make sure that funding occurs. Thank you.
I don't necessarily think it's an issue of funding. I think it's about how funds are spent And I think schools would have been better served spending money on one-to-ones, TAs, PPWs, additional teachers, special ed teachers, than they would have on the STAT initiative. I think kids do need computers, but I don't think every kindergartner needs a computer, and I know that money could be better spent. I think I saw a statistic in Baltimore County. There's one counselor for every 460 students, and that is not enough. There are a lot of psychosocial and socioeconomic issues that impact kids today. I saw it with my CASA kid, and I don't think schools are adequately staffed to deal with that, and I think we need to spend our money more wisely. I've also advocated for having social workers move out of DSS, which is on York Road, and be out in the schools. They're advocating for the same people anyway. They could rotate among the schools. They could pick the schools that are closest to where they live, and it would serve them and it would serve the school systems well. But I do think we need to spend our money more wisely, and we need to invest in the personnel that help our students, not necessarily in the technology that many students don't need.
Thank you.
So thank you all for these wonderful questions. We are coming up on 8 o'clock. So I'm going to ask both the candidates to prepare here for their closing statement. I'm sure each of them will be available for a few minutes afterwards to chat informally if there are other questions. Since Ms. Mack got to lead off, we'll let Mr. Gresick lead off with the closing statement. I'll ask each of you to keep this to about 3 minutes each. If you'd like to stand.
Sorry, I as a teacher, always bug me saying that so much. Again, I'm a teacher, I'm a father. There's my 2 kids, my daughter's falling asleep. Oh, it's okay, you can fall asleep, it's all right. Member of this community, I chose this community because of the great schools and the network that it provides. I was inspired to run for the Board of Ed because as a teacher, and it's hard at times to understand these policies that come down the pike when they're not by educators. And they don't understand the struggles that we go through on a daily basis. I see my brothers and sisters in education stand up in West Virginia, in Arizona, and this is how I'm standing by running for Board of Ed. I want our schools to improve, and I'm seeing this as an educator and as a father and as a community. I'm also wanting to be as transparent as possible in my approach to this. And that's why I mentioned Greater Gresick before, I'll mention Greater Gresick again. Because I would like to use this forum, and there's already built-in time in May, to actually come and talk to me and say, look, you deserve an A. And I'll be like, thank you. Or you could write on a piece of paper, I get an E, and then you can tell me, hopefully constructively, why I deserve that E. So I can grow as a board member, and I can best serve you. You have a great choice this coming November 6th in this election to put a representative on that board to best meet the needs of our kids in a real and meaningful way. Please do not take that choice lightly. Thank you.
If someone had told me last year that I would be sitting here advocating for a seat on the Board of Education, I would have said, you're crazy. My youngest child is 30. My kids got a great education in Baltimore County, and I probably have other things to do with my time. But when I began to teach at CCBC, and I realized that the students are so ill-prepared for either career or college, I started writing letters, and I didn't get anywhere, and I literally wrote to everybody. I invited people to my house. I was like, please come and talk to me about education. Something really bad is going on in education. And my whole life I have said to my kids, if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. So when the article appeared in the paper that the Board of Education was going to have 7 elected members, I thought I better put my money where my mouth is and at least try. So, as I said, I've walked 1,700 miles since January 29th. I have talked to more people. I have listened to every conceivable problem that people bring to me, and I just think that we as a society would be so much better off if we had well-educated children. And I'm not saying college-educated children, I am saying children who have a great educational foundation that allow them to be contributing members to society. So I put my name out there. I will work my hardest as a board member for children and for teachers. Thank you.
Thank you both. Please join me in thanking Mrs. Mack and Mr. Gresick. And thank you so much to each of you for attending tonight. We really appreciate it. We would love to chat with you more about the Southwest Area Education Advisory Council. Please be on the lookout for our upcoming meetings. Principal Barnett, would you like any closing statements?
Thank you everyone for this.
Okay, well,
We appreciate it.
big thank you to Relay Elementary for hosting tonight. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.